Press play. He's the voice of the intersection of marketing, tech, and popular culture. Thinking is his commodity. DJ, data punk, stylish sock collector, and author of the book Disruptive Marketing. Jeffrey Cologne is your host of Disruptive FM, the marketing podcast for eccentric minds.
Wednesday, it's a special episode of Disruptive FM, the marketing podcast for eccentric minds. I'm your host, Jeffrey Cologne, broadcasting from the campus of Microsoft in Redmond, Washington. So, I had told many people that I was going to do a special podcast episode around the Microsoft event that took place today, the day I'm recording this, Wednesday, October 26th. Yes, there was an event at, depending on where you were in the world, it was 7 a.m. Pacific time for me. Don't get me started on who decided to schedule this East Coast time and forget about the fact that people might still be getting ready in the morning on the West Coast. And 3 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time. But my employer, Microsoft, and I have to put that in there as a disclaimer, had some really interesting announcements today, and I just wanted to use this special podcast to go through what was announced and maybe the strategic reasoning for those announcements, and maybe also poke some holes in a few things as well. You know, it's okay to do that. I think companies can learn from maybe questioning a few things. We don't have to always root for the home team. Tomorrow, Thursday, October 27th, from Cupertino, I believe, Apple is going to announce some new items. I think one of them's already been leaked. The MacBook Pro has this touchpad across the top. But it'll be interesting to see what else comes out of that event. And note, Microsoft had announced this October 26th event about a month and a half ago. And then recently, last week, Apple announced an event on the 27th. So I wonder if that was in response to the timing of the Microsoft event. But a couple of things that you need to know if you didn't get to check out everything or you didn't get to read everything, and you want a download on what's going on. The big things to note from today's event and the announcement, there's three big things that are going on. One is the Windows 10 Creators Update. This is a big move in terms of updates to the current operating system of Windows 10. First off, I love the name Creators Update. We know that we are in more of an economy, and we talk about this quite a bit, going back to even episode 1 of this podcast, about the creative class, that we are moving from a manufacturing economy more into a cognitive economy. We are making things in our minds that we are bringing to life through code. There are, of course, economic implications around this, but we're not going to get into an ethical discussion on this episode. We're just going to note that from a strategic standpoint, I think this is the right direction for the company to finally say, hey, it's not about utility. There was an interview the other night I watched with CEO Satya Nadella on Wall Street Journal Live, has their event from California. And there was a question I think he stumbled on that I think he got that he pivoted and made correct today. And that is, he had said, well, Microsoft is a utility company. It helps you get things done. And we have to realize that, you don't think first and foremost about a company if it's a utility company. You don't think about your electric company. You don't think about the water company. You don't think about any of those things unless those things are not working. And that's always a bad sign for utility companies. But you do think about companies if they go beyond utility, if they actually have a presence in your life because they allow you to make things, they allow you to imagine things, they allow you to create things. So I think it's a really good pivot that the company, Microsoft, moves away from empowering every person to achieve more, which is really a utilitarian type of mantra. I mean, what does achieve more mean? It's subjective. But also it's very much wrapped around the old tech manifesto of efficiency. We know now that making things more efficient doesn't make things more humanitarian, doesn't find the new innovations in life, doesn't make things interesting or unique. Creators and makers and people who imagine make things creative and unique and interesting. So I really like this pivot where Microsoft is empowering creators and makers and people who imagine things. That's a huge area to pay attention to, especially because I think from a strategic standpoint, there were many companies that owned that space for a period of time, and then everyone moved away from it. Everyone was about, hey, let's move toward efficiency and process, and let's make things easier for people to do more. And at the end of the day, I don't think people want to do more. They want to do things better. So big thing in terms of Windows 10 Creators Update. The cool thing about this update is the enablement of any gamer now to broadcast. So we've seen how Twitch has really owned this space, and I think this is now the ability for, if you're a PC gamer, if you're an Xbox gamer, you can broadcast that across sort of an ecosystem using this technology called Beam, which I like as well. So it's sort of beam me up, Scotty. This is also an interesting area because we know that there has been sort of a video application lacking from Microsoft. You have the YouTubes of the world, you have Facebook Live, you have Twitch, you have Ustream, you have all these other solutions. So it'll be interesting to see how the gaming side helps empower live video, maybe for the enterprise side of the business. This is where I think there's still strength in a company being involved in both the consumer as well as the B2B enterprise side of the spectrum. So Windows 10 Creators Update. A lot of things that are going to happen there. Definitely check out some of the other information that you'll be able to do. There's also the democratization of 3D. Now, this is very important because there's always discussions on how do we democratize any new technology so that people can use it to their advantage. And I think all companies want to really be involved in this, but this is very ambitious in terms of what Microsoft is trying to do. And I think that was a huge area in terms of how do you bring 3D to everyone and approach this almost as a movement. Very much how other companies approached maybe app development back in the day. Hey, how do we allow anyone to develop an app? We're past that stage now. Now it's about how do we enable anybody to create 3D. This is huge, especially in the area of marketing, because we've talked about this quite a bit. I write about it quite a bit in my book. I have conversations about this with tons of people, and we're there. We are there, especially now that we have software enablement And I think the biggest announcement by far is Microsoft saying, hey, we're bringing back, or not bringing back, but we have this new version of Paint. Yes, Paint, a program I used when I was 12 years old, that with the upgrade for Windows 10 Creators update is going to allow people to use Paint 3D. That's massive. That's just so interesting in terms of how we bring this to a whole new generation of makers and creators, and how we will watch them sort of use this, whether it's utilizing it for graphic design, or building something in terms of a new application. A lot of things that can happen here. So this is a totally untapped dimension, as Mashable just wrote about it in an article this morning while I'm recording this. And, most people, and I'll read this section from the piece that Mashable wrote, because this is really important. If you're aware of 3D imaging at all, you probably associate it with advanced professional level graphic design, something reserved for the digital artists at Pixar and Electronic Arts, EA, not your grandmother. And you'd be right. Even though there have been occasional pushes to democratize 3D imaging, most imaging tools remain stubbornly 2D. So what we have now is we really have an entire movement into this area of software, which I think is a huge announcement for the company. First announcement, hey, we're going to have this new Windows upgrade. Within that Windows upgrade, we're trying to democratize 3D, bring it to everybody. Pretty big. Then they sort of moved into, now that we are going to have this 3D announcement, we're also going to have a new VR headset that's going to be lower priced. And the reason they're trying to move into that area is most VR, AR headsets, very expensive. The barrier to entry, really high. And so I think what Microsoft is trying to do here is say, hey, we want to make this accessible to more people. Because if we're going to democratize 3D, we can't just say, hey, we have the software for it, and then not give hardware to people who can actually then test things, see how they may look in an AR or VR environment. So that's another big area that was pushed in the presentation this morning. And then finally, the biggest one had nothing to do with software, but more on the hardware side. And it was the Surface team announcing the Surface Studio, a desktop creation station with a magical dial that you use to create. Now, this is the high end, the top end of the market, really aimed at the creative class, because the price point that Microsoft has on this device is really only going to be accessible to the professionals in the field or to large enterprise infrastructures. But it does aim in an area that was owned almost 100% by Apple and sort of ignored for the last couple of years. Almost like, hey, we have a phone, and that phone is good. But the phone is not a place where you're doing a lot of high-end creation. You might be using apps for certain services. It might be more utilitarian in nature. It might be more note-taking in nature, but it wasn't the high-end content that you were creating within that ecosystem or infrastructure. That was still going to be on your laptop, or more likely your desktop. And this announcement really moves into an area where I think Microsoft is saying, hey, we are going to move the sort of desktop product world that had always been aimed at the creative class. If you think about who is still using desktop interfaces, it's IT and it's the creative class. But even IT has really moved more into a mobile environment. Creative class is still in front of a large screen trying to create interesting things. And this is what the Surface Studio is going to do. It's all sort of betting on this new age of creativity and 3D creativity. Based on a lot of the tweets that I read in this area, a lot of people were really excited about the design of it. Many people thought Apple maybe had slept a little too long in this area, maybe was paying more attention to the tablet ecosystem. Who knows what may have happened there. It'll be interesting to see if Apple actually does have an announcement of their own in this area, or if they really talk more about the MacBook Pro line of devices. It's very, very interesting in terms of sort of the strategy here and the areas that they're moving into. Now, that being said, no update to a tablet, which again we know is an area of emerging creativity. A lot of us are using tablets now to do a number of things with. We are shooting live video on those tablets. We're editing on those tablets. We're balancing books on those tablets. We're sending email. We're running basically a small business. I still think the one area that Microsoft should maybe key in on, even though we don't have a lot of growth in this area, is still the tablet area. I think it is an untouched area in terms of the do-it-yourself gig economy, moving away from the laptop more to a hybrid device. And then, of course, nothing said about mobile phones. So that led a lot of people wondering, like, hey, is the company going to be involved even in these areas? Who knows? Nothing said about that. That obviously is a large ecosystem that remains untapped. But I think if we look at where wearables are going and the next sort of wave of computing, there are definitely some interesting things that come from this. But fascinating in terms of what was announced today, and curious to know what you thought. If you got a chance to look at the videos for Microsoft Surface Studio, what you think about the device, regardless of price. If you could see yourself actually using that, if you're a graphic designer or you're an artist, because the creative market really, I think, is an area that is up for grabs right now. And I say this as a person who works in this field. I mean, who has a MacBook Pro, who has a PC, who has a number of different devices, a Surface as well as an iPad. The creative class is not necessarily tethered to Apple devices right now. I think for many years we were. I think that is not necessarily the case right now. Yeah. Thanks again for tuning into this special podcast episode. Again, if there's a lot of different articles that are out there, but the three big things, the three big takeaways: Windows 10 Creators Update, 3D Paint, Windows virtual reality headsets, Xbox live streaming, also the Surface Studio, and with that, the Surface Dial. And so it'll be interesting to see, how people use that Surface Dial. It's a really interesting input device. And another thing there, too, is it just doesn't work with the Surface Studio. It works with any Surface. So you could just buy the dial and use that on your Surface Pro 4 if you wanted to. Tomorrow, when I release a new episode, I will definitely be talking about what Apple talks about in their event, which is taking place on the 27th. And make sure you rate and review and share our episodes. We are available, of course, on iTunes, Google Play Music, TuneIn, Spreaker, SoundCloud, and YouTube. I'm your host, Jeffrey Colon. This is the Marketing Podcast for Eccentric Minds. Disruptive FM. We'll catch you next time.
You've been listening to an episode of Disruptive FM, the marketing podcast for eccentric minds. Remember to subscribe to the show on iTunes. Purchase a copy of Jeffrey's latest book, Disruptive Marketing, on Kindle, hardcover and audio. Signing off from the city of Seattle. Press pause.